Thanks for tuning in to Sci-Fi in the Margins by Multiverse Con. My name is Kyoko M. Thank you for joining us today. I am the author of the Black Parade series and the Of Cinder and Bone series. I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves one by one.
Hi, my name is Violette Meyer. I am a speculative fiction author. I do science fantasy and also paranormal. I'm the author of the Angel Crush series and Roar of the Immortal.
Yep, my name is Maurice Broaddus. I'm a science fiction, fantasy, and horror author. I'm also a teacher and community organizer and editor over at Apex Magazine. And my latest two books are Pimp My Airship and The Usual Suspects.
Hey, I'm Liz Gorinsky, pronouns are she or they, and I have been editing science fiction and fantasy for a long time now, and I'm currently the founder and editor at Era One Books, a new independent speculative fiction publisher.
Great to have you guys here today. So our panel is going to be talking about science fiction, particularly in relation to different diversities and different backgrounds and our inclusion in this genre. Before we get to that, I'll just say a few more things for Multiverse Con. For our panelists, please check the linked videos in the description or on multiversecon.org, where you can also find their links. Speaking of multiversecon.org, if you're watching this as part of the convention weekend stream, join us on the Discord channel for this track for a watch party of this panel with some of the panelists. Instructions on how to get to our Discord can be found at multiversecon.org/Discord. We're also collecting for charity, so if you go to Ko-fi, which is spelled ko-fi.com/multiversecon. All donations will go to support the Equal Justice Initiative. And finally, if you want any multiverse swag, please check out our store on the website. We have shirts, enamel pins, and more. So we can go ahead and get started, everybody. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So our first question, what was your earliest exposure to science fiction that you can remember?
For me, it was actually being kicked out of my Sunday school class.
Are you including fantasy?
That's like, oh, no, I'm just saying, yeah, I'd been kicked out of my Sunday school class. My Sunday school teacher had sort of taken me under his wing and go, look, you can't keep doing and saying some of the stuff you've been saying, but I think you're secretly one of us. And so he introduced me to things like Doctor Who and X-Men as a part of his Sunday school. Well, not as part of Sunday school, but just he introduced me to these things, and it sort of opened up my eyes to a whole new world of possibility for myself.
Yeah. I have very few memories of my childhood, but one thing I sort of like has canonically been passed down to me is that I, as a little kid, there used to be a big Barnes and Noble in New York City, and I saw The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and a discount table, and this is a whole collection. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it was this big friendly green book, and I just like gravitated towards that friendly alien, and like I think that sealed my fate forever.
I think for me, movies, like just watching old movies with my mom, like People Under the Earth and Jason and the Argonauts and all things. Movies were my first experience.
And then for me, I think probably the earliest I would say is I was very small, and I remember and it depends on what you count as sci-fi, but I remember watching Batman the Animated Series when I was really small, and I remember that's one of the first things I visually saw as a kid, because I remember I was on like the monkey bars, and I used to pretend to be Catwoman with this little boy when we were little on like the monkey bars and stuff like that. But I would say the same. I think the other thing that I remember earliest was probably comic books. I think my dad had a big old stack, and even if I didn't really understand the storylines, I would be looking at the pictures. I remember he had a lot of X-Men comics, as a matter of fact, which is a really good segue into our next question, which is, when is the first time you recall seeing a person of color in a science fiction work? And that can be, like I said, books, comics, TV, movies, any of that. Well, we start with you, Violet.
I guess the most famous would be on Star Trek. That's the one I can remember, even though I guess I didn't grow up when that was on TV, but I remember seeing the reruns of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's my answer too. My first Star Trek was Voyager, and I watched that with my dad when I was a little kid. And I don't think I recognized the, import at the time, but there were 3 POC members of the, major cast, and like so that just seemed normal because I don't think I was watching that much other TV, and so I was like, okay, this is what TV is like.
Yep. My answer's the same. It was Star Trek. You can't see right now, but I'm actually wearing my Captain Sisko T-shirt. And behind me, there may be a huge Captain Sisko action figure up there also. But yeah, I grew up on the original Star Trek. And Star Trek's always been my go-to for, and I think I've very much imprinted on Star Trek as being pretty informative about my science fiction experience.
All right, excellent. So we got a lot of Trekkies here. That's good to see. All right. So moving forward, do you feel, especially since that's such a great example, actually I was on a panel from Geek Girl Con a few years ago, and that was what our panel was about, was specifically diversity and interracial romance, and that was a big deal on Star Trek when Captain Kirk and Uhura kissed. So kind of leading into that a little bit, do you feel that science fiction has an obligation to include people of color? And if you do, why or why not?
I think they do because people of color exist. A matter of fact, the earth is more people of color than not. So to exclude them would just not show a reflection of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's always something.
Sorry. I don't know if I use the word obligation, but I think that as people who are paying attention to the world, we should want to, that without including those stories and like actively working to include those stories, we're ignoring not only like a portion of the population that deserves to be represented, but also a lot of really interesting stories. That why would we want to narrow our focus when we could have a much wider, global and sort of more inclusive perspective and new interesting ideas to bring into the mix.
Again, I was I don't know if obligation is the right word again, but and I guess I'm also separating, I guess, the genre industry versus the genre participants, I guess, because I mean, if the industry is smart, they're going to be well, and I guess their favorite color at that point is green. So if they're smart, they want to be as inclusive as possible. But as far as the genre, like, I guess I view it almost like on the individual level. So as a part of genre, I guess my obligation is to myself. And I want to always be writing and creating the things either I wish were there, or the things I want to read, the things I want to see. That's the obligation is on me. The industry is one thing, but I view the obligation as being on me for making sure that my voice is included, and I'm opening up the doors for other voices to be heard.
Okay, that's a great way to phrase it, that it comes down to the individual, that it not necessarily, we know that the public at large can decide to do things that go against what we particularly believe in. I always related it to, there was a scene in this miniseries on FX called Feud that was about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, and there was a character who was talking about, she literally had like a printout of the population in the United States, and she was pointing out the differences in the, how women eventually, were a higher population than men. So the movie industry itself literally would have to include women because it would make economical sense to them and monetary sense to them. And if that's what the public is, why would you not want that reflected in art? I mean, you're only, shorting yourself money in that case. I was going to say, what's a good one? I think our next question will be, what has been the biggest hurdle for you to overcome while you've been writing, editing, or, reading science fiction?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just gonna like final thought to the last question, which ties into this, is that so as the industry rep here, I think I personally do feel that obligation that like I have like a lot of power and a lot of privilege that is not necessarily fair. So it does seem that it is my duty to sort of give back whatever amount of that I can, or use that to uplift other voices. And in terms of that hurdle, I think the biggest thing that I always feel is time. That there's a lot of I think there's been a lot of amazing work on kind of best practices for inclusion and like widening one's own perspective. And I think it always comes down to there's great places that you can do outreach, you can kind of do mentorship work, you can there's so much that you can do, and there's also so many things that you have to do. So I find myself thinking that, oh gosh, it would be great if I could kind of like read all of these anthologies of underrepresented voices and try to find people and reach out to them directly. And then at the end of the day, you've got to keep your business running, or you've got to keep your lights on, or you've got to get yourself fed. And so I think that like finding the time to do the work is probably the biggest hurdle.
I think I guess I could just divide it up into two different answers. So I guess there's the business side of me and the artist side of me. And so for the business side of me, the biggest hurdle has been the markets, specifically the gatekeepers to the market. And I'm a big believer in, gatekeepers don't worry me or bother me. I just need to figure out who they are, so I can figure out who I need to work around in order to do what I do. And so for a lot of it, the hurdle has been figuring out the gatekeepers, working around the gatekeepers. For example, I mentioned that one of my latest projects is Usual Suspects. That's a middle grade detective novel featuring two young Black boys. But I wrote that book back in 2012 originally. And the market was very different in 2012 versus even just a short 4-year gap of 2016 when it sold. The market had changed dramatically. I mean, it didn't stop me from writing the book, because it was still the book I wanted to see and the book I wanted to create. But it took a while for the market and for the opportunity to arise for me. And then as a practitioner or as an artist, I'd say my biggest hurdle right now is just dreaming big enough. I want to infuse my work with as many dreams and as much hope and as many possibilities as I can. And so my biggest challenge right now is like, hey, how can I dream bigger? How can I push myself further? And, that's where I'm at right now.
I think my biggest hurdle would be staying true to my art and the things I want to write. I try to ignore the gatekeepers, because I believe that right now we're in a beautiful part of time where the internet has opened up so many gates. So the thing is to market and to get out there and to find your tribe, to find the ones who love what you do. I don't want to change what I do to get approval from a certain sect. I rather find my tribe so I can do what I love and stay true to.
Oh, that's a beautiful sentiment. I think I definitely agree with that. Like, before I even tried to write of Cinder and Bone, I was like terrified, because I actually had like a certain pocket of readers, and I was going in a different direction because I started out in urban fantasy. And so I was a little scared to get into science fiction, because it does give you like to me, a little bit more of a structure that you have to, obey within whatever you decide is going to be your limits, and how much you want to fit it into science and hard science and things that are real. And I think that I was a little terrified to, color inside the lines to a certain degree, but I ended up doing exactly as you said, Violet, is finding your tribe and seeing that there are other people who are, really interested in the same things that you are. And I really was able to embrace it, I think, after that point. So that was a great answer. Thank you. Next, what is one science fiction film that you feel yourself revisiting a whole lot? And is there a particular reason that you find yourself watching it a lot? Anybody feel free to jump in. I can do it myself if you like.
I was trying to figure out how to narrow it down to just one.
No, that's true. That is true. I have dozens.
If I had to pick one, I would probably come back to Black Panther. And a big part of that is just the nature of the world building. I mean, the first time I saw the movie, of the 5 times I paid to go see it in the movie theaters, and the first few times, I was there just to absorb the movie, just to absorb the experience. That was me, and yes, I dressed up for at least the first 2 times I went to go see this. It was a pilgrimage for me. But then the last few times I was watching the movie, it was about observing the world building that was done. It's one thing to see the action up front, but what's going on in the background? Because it's a detailed and layered film. And so the times I kept going back to watch it was to study what was going on in the background. What is the culture of the world that we're experiencing, and how is that being portrayed? And so it was a class of world building for me.
Great. Yeah, I agree. You're not alone. I think I went 3 times in theater, and then when it came out, I probably watched it in a row several times.
For me, would be between Black Panther and the Terminator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those I revisit. I especially because we are moving into an age of AI, seriously, it makes you think, like, can the Terminator potentially happen?
Yeah, and these every single time they come up with a new article about AI, I get more and more terrified. It's like, did you guys not watch any of the line of different sci-fi? Like, all of them come to the same conclusion. If we make it, it will eventually kill us. Like, It has no other conclusion.
And yet there's right now scientists trying to work on creating dinosaurs. So literally have that going on right now.
Right.
Yeah, we have not learned. I'm not a rewatcher by nature. Like, I actually couldn't really think of anything that I'd rewatched recently, or I think partially because my work requires me to read the same books 5 or 6 or 7 times each. So I just I'm always looking for novelty where filmed media is concerned.
Well, sure. What's one that I would say in the last few years you watched that you just really enjoyed?
Well, I guess I think that, for a while I was just really stuck in, I watch a lot of live entertainment. And so in normal world, this has shifted a lot in the current situation, but I'd go to the theater for entertainment more often. There is this amazing science fiction play called We Are Nowhere that is kind of about it's about the theory of relativity and its relation to your personal life. So I think I will be drawn to things that are kind of here's the philosophical underpinnings of science fiction and how they teach us how to be as humans. So those are the themes that I kind of find most useful to sort of center myself and think about my position in the world.
Yeah, that was actually my once I moved past Black Panther, I realized the movies I came back to revisit were the next 2 were Gattaca and Minority Report, pretty much for those same reasons. They're movies that explore big ideas or big philosophies, and that's the reason I kept coming back to those movies.
Okay, awesome. I think mine, I have, like he said, I have several. I know I've rewatched a billion times, but I think recently Jurassic Park is one that just it hits for me, and it's so impressive that in this length of time, it still not only looks fantastic, but I come back to the themes a lot of that conversation where they're sitting at the table and talking about whether he had the right to go out and clone these animals. I mean, it's something like I love that entire conversation about, nature versus man versus God. Just because you have the ability to do something, you have to understand the repercussions that come with doing something that dramatic, especially considering, like they said, this was an extinction. This was nature choosing these animals to go. They had to go. That's just what the universe decided. And then you brought them back. Everyone meet my cat. This is Selena. She's very friendly. She loves people. So that you just met her. I hope you enjoyed that. All right. So
Absolutely.
Moving on. What do you think about the idea that science fiction is a way for writers to talk about the otherness without necessarily having to bring it to the forefront? So, for example, being able to have conversations about prejudice, classism, racism, imperialism, colonialism, or xenophobia.
It's a great tool because sometimes people can't see themselves clearly, but if you use an analogy, they can actually see the bigger picture and maybe put themselves in it and say, wow, I've seen this before. I am this and I do this. And it also relieves the pressure of, because people are uncomfortable talking about racism and classism and sexism. No one wants their, to be pointed at and accused, and everyone's defensive. But when you read it in a different world with different people that has nothing to do with you, it may give you a more, unbiased understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually tend to go the opposite direction, which is, again, having imprinted on Star Trek. I mean, like, I ask myself often, have we actually seen an episode of Star Trek? Obvious is kind of what they do, and they're going to beat you over the head with their point. And I'm just like, I tend to end up doing that in my own work. But I think the caveat there is that, yes, I'm going to be obvious, and I'm going to be talking about, you pick up my book. Yes, you're going to encounter conversations on racism and imperialism and colonialism, and I'm not subtle at all. But I want to weave a story and present you with characters and create a spell with my story, such that you don't care. It's like, all right, yes, these are some pretty heavy themes that we have going on, but I want to carry you along on the power of story, so that you're just along for the ride at this point.
That's great. That actually reminds me of, it's not science fiction, of course, but I don't know if anybody saw Knives Out by Rian Johnson. That was one for me where I was so excited. I only saw one trailer and I went in the movie, and you're like, whatever, it's a whodunit, kind of like Clue. And you get there and it's having this stellar conversation about racism, prejudice, and specifically like the elite that run this country, that their behavior is completely unacceptable and ridiculous. And it was so much fun because you sit down expecting a whodunit, and then it introduces these themes that are just like on point. There were several times where it was using actual phrases you've heard repeated in your life from these awful sector of people. And it was just so liberating to see it systematically take those people down. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And I love seeing themes like that in science fiction, whether they decide to make it really obvious or if they make it more subtle.
Yeah. I have complicated feelings about this, and I think that like the line is often, I don't like the tendency to use a science fiction gloss as a way to avoid talking about the issue, basically to use it as a shield instead of actually engaging with the issue. And I think that one of the problems there can be kind of that the tendency, especially in, let's say, like science fiction TV, is to solve a situation by the end. So you show a group that is downtrodden for some invented characteristic, and then by the end you fix their issue, and it's not that easy. And so I think that by kind of inventing a easily soluble problem, you might kind of draw parallels that are not, that we can't take to the real world, that are not realistic in that way. And then I think the other side of that is often that we have seen for a long time that the science fiction issue shows that specifically focus on otherness, sometimes that's the only time they highlight that issue, that they'll bring in a character sort of specifically to be the other, and then you don't get any sense of their interior life or their joy. And I think that that's really limiting. So basically, like, do it occasionally kind of as a teaching tool, it can be deployed in an interesting fashion, but I think that the failure mode of that can be not so great, and can be kind of like either limiting or too simplistic.
That's a great point. I think that it can definitely, if you don't do it right, it can lead to tokenism. I think that's an excellent point. Thank you so much for bringing that up. For you guys, what is some advice that when you first got started in your careers that you think would have been helpful to you?
See, for me, it was be more you. Because there's, or especially early on, tendency to go, oh man, maybe I should write to this market, because you get it drilled in your head by some of the gatekeepers of like, oh no, why don't you make your characters more like this, or why don't you discuss these sort of issues? and took a while for me to gain that confidence to toss all of that out the window and go, you know what? Or I could be more me. I could double down on who I am and then write the stories that I see as missing, or let me write the stories that I would like to have read growing up. So yeah, double down on who you are and add your voice to the canon of words.
Say, be honest about why you're writing. Are you writing because you just want to make money? Are you writing because you want the world to see your viewpoint, to hear your artistry, to see the way you create stories? Or you just want to do both? And I think having a purpose for your writing is very important, because I think sometimes we go out and say, well, I want to write what I think people want, and then you just start doing this cookie cutter literature because you're just hoping to get sales. Or you have the idea that I could be me and people will automatically, you'll make $1 million because they just need to hear Violet's voice. So I think it's a balance, and you have to know exactly what you want and work to get to that goal, whatever it is.
I think if I could take like the time machine view, it would sort of be like the world is not quite there yet, but it gets better. At the beginning of my career, it was really like, I think it's really true that there was like a lot of institutional resistance to, I would say, like progressive goals in science fiction and fantasy, that, you kind of bring up something that was inclusive from various perspectives, and people will be like, well, why do we need that? Why do we need that as an emphasis? So had to do it in sort of a stealth perspective for a while. But I think being able to look forward from there to where we are now, we still have miles to go, but that there is a hunger out there for increasing the scope of our literature, and it'll catch up. You'll eventually be able to do what you want to do.
Great. I was going to say, I think mine personally would have just been to trust myself a little bit more. I agree that in the beginning, I kind of wanted to sound like cooler people or more established authors. And eventually, I was able to just get more confident. And, the more you write, the more you experience things. And it helps you. I think it does help you kind of become who you are meant to be, the more that you continue to do it. So moving on, do you think that Hollywood will embrace diversity in science fiction, or is it always going to kind of have this bit of a resistance given, who kind of runs it? And I put that in quotation marks because like there's not like a undercover brother, the man, but at the same time, there kind of is a little bit. Like, I think that there's definitely kind of like this overall panel of decisions that get made for a lot of major works. And so I think that's why a lot of independent films and smaller films have found so much more success and with being inclusive. So I definitely want to see what you guys' thoughts are on that.
I think they will embrace it as long as it's lucrative. Because it's money at the end of the day. And right now, because of the environment we live in, the world is tired of a lot of racism and sexism and all of these things. But human nature, we go into phases. So we don't know in a couple of years that will you still love Black people, or is it going to revert back to something different? So I think Hollywood will do it as long as they find it lucrative. Hopefully the changes that are happening in the world now will be something that will remain and develop into something more permanent, and people will really, really embrace the world as it is.
Yeah, that's pretty much
I don't know if I see Hollywood embracing it. I feel like Hollywood is kind of like 6 inches in front of the bulldozer, sort of, and they're like, okay, what is the minimum that we need to do to like be okay here? There is, I guess, recently like new Best Picture regulations introduced to the Oscar, and it's sort of interesting. But there's like these 4 things, and it's like you've got to check 2 boxes that is in 5 years, and I'm like, why are we like this is the thing that we need to say that we're doing to kind of be inclusive. And it's so far from, I think, what either like thought leaders or like radical productions are doing, that it will help, but it still feels like that's kind of they're doing the bare minimum that is socially acceptable. And I think that they will continue to do that until basically it will always take pioneers from outside of Hollywood to say, okay, I'm going to try this thing, I'm going to stake myself, and then once I prove that it's worth doing, and Hollywood will kind of they were there all along.
I agree. Bare minimum is a great phrase for this entire issue of just, we'll do what, again, I don't remember. I think I was thinking of a different project, but when I saw that the Mulan remake was like the entire production team, director, writer, they were all white. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a story specifically about China and its history and the related historical figures, and you didn't go get Chinese writers or all right then. And that was one of it just felt like that should have been obvious representation, especially considering this is something that even if the people who made it did all the research, it's still, there's so much context that's important to writing and understanding and portraying another culture, that I thought it was crazy that most of the production team was white. And I think that's the thing. Oh, there's a check mark. As long as I'm hitting these couple of things, then I'll be all right. And I think that's, it's definitely going to be a problem, and has been a problem for a long time. So it definitely, I agree that it's going to take pioneers to fix that. All right. Does anyone have any other thoughts about that, or we'll move on? Yep. Okay, great. All right. So speaking of film, if you were given the green light to make a film out of anything that you've ever written, would you like to write, direct, or produce?
I don't know. I like hands and everything that has my name on it. So I'll really try to do all of it, even if I'm confident or not. But I would just want to have my hands in all of it, and hopefully I have people around me who I can release what I am not good at too.
Mm.
Yeah, right now I feel like I'm in a class called Hollywood, because I recently just had a project of mine optioned by AMC to be turned into a TV series.
Oh, cool.
Now it was a project that I wrote in collaboration with other people, so I'm not as attached to it, which is great, because I'm seeing how this Hollywood system works. And I'm like, oh, this is horrible. I would hate for my stuff to go through this system. Are you kidding me? And so I'm trying to figure out, again, like I said, I don't mind gatekeepers as long as I can figure them out. And so I'm trying to, so as I'm trying to learn this, I'm like, where would I want to be in the room? Again, I have no talent as a director, but the director seems to be the main storyteller, but everything's done in such collaboration. I'm wondering if it's like, do I want to be the producer so I could assemble the team that I then collaborate with? Or do I just want, or you know what, when all said and done, let me at least write it so that I know the groundwork has at least been laid by me, so that, as you go and do whatever you want with it anyway, at least I can rest assured I got the groundwork done the way I wanted it. So I don't know.
I flip back and forth on it. I think that I think producing might be where I wanted to go, because as you stated, assembling the team of people to make it is so vital, because you see all these horror stories about things, especially when they adapt books into movies. Sometimes you get lucky and you get somebody who's on point and they understood what the story's about and they try to represent it. Then you have stuff like I think the first Percy Jackson. I remember after it was all said and done, and I think he was finally released from whatever disclosure and he couldn't say anything, he wrote this crazy long blog about all the stuff that went wrong. Every time he picked up the phone, they would make some ridiculous change to the story, and he's like, you can't do that. That's not what this is about. And they're like, oh well, and they would just do it. And I was like, oh, I can't imagine how that must feel of if you don't get the particular rights that you want that are related to the film, then they can just do whatever they want, and you just kind of have to sit there and go, okay, well. So kind of in a bit of a segue, when you guys write, when the way that you picture your characters, as I understand, is different for everybody. Do you have like actors that are kind of in your head when you are writing, or do you just see them as a completely, fictional person that looks uniquely the way that they do?
Right around actors or anyone I know, I create the characters unique. Mm-hmm. So I figure that would be the hard part of me making a movie, because I would want to find someone that actually looks like the people that I create. Mm-hmm. So they're always original.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to write my friends into my works. It just makes it easy for me, and then my friends end up buying my book so they can figure out whether or not they're in it. So I'm like, hey, it's great marketing too. But it's easy for me to, for me to have that sort of visual reference point, for example. So I mean, my characters end up being original, but my friends is like, that's my jump off point. It's like, all right, take my friend. I can jump off from there to create this character, and it just helps me to have that sort of reference in my head. So it's easier for me to, having the friend there is easier than having, like, say, a Hollywood star in my head, because my friends, I can keep going back to observe them in the day to day, whereas I only have their movie stars movies or TV shows to follow and study. So yeah, my friends.
Gotcha. So Liz, when you find yourself editing and reading and doing different things, is that how you see different characters? Do you assign them like someone in real life that they kind of look like, or do they just look unique to you?
Really, yeah, I don't know if I'm a hugely visual thinker in that way. I feel like I tend to have kind of like, I guess, like, figure out the voice of the writer that I'm working with and like get that in my head. Sometimes I'll think about like what is the right sort of soundtrack to edit a project to, so I have the right oral atmosphere. But it's relatively rare that I actually like sort of see it as a movie in my head.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I think that I'll think about like if there's a scene that has complex choreography, I can kind of try to imagine that, but it's more like, almost like Lego figures, or sometimes I'll look at maps and things like that. So I guess I get more invested in the schematic and logistical stuff than what the humans look like.
Okay, that's a unique perspective. I was going to say, not everybody has like that kind of cinematical, that's not a word, cinematic visual when they read. I know I do, because I've always kind of joked about, that's what I'm doing, is transcribing the movie in my head into words, which is what makes it so difficult probably. I think for me personally, it's like a half and half. Like some characters look uniquely like how I picture them in my head, and then like a handful of them I kind of eventually assign like an actor. So that way, when I'm, writing about whatever they're doing and experiencing, it's kind of good to have a reference point, just like he mentioned a little bit ago, of kind of like, because I've noticed I'll do that too. If there's a actor in particular, I'll go like watch a little scene of them just to kind of get like body language and the way that they speak and patterns and little stuff like that. So it actually kind of ends up helping a little bit in that regard. What is, so especially since we mentioned Star Trek earlier, do you feel that you have like a science fiction work that influenced what you ended up going after in your careers?
Honestly, for me, I have a love more on the fantasy end than I do sci-fi. So I was probably more influenced by old movies like Clash of the Titans and Jason's and the Argonauts and stuff like that. I've always liked the fantastical more than I've liked sci-fi. But
Yeah, actually, I came up as a horror writer. So, so a lot of my formative, the first half of my career was literally me swimming around in the horror waters. But the book that ended up changing the trajectory of my career was a science fiction novel called Futureland by Walter Mosley. He's mostly known as a crime writer, but he'd written this collection of 9 interconnected short stories that were all sci-fi in the, what he called the near imminent future. And when I encountered that was game changing for me, because all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second, you can do this and you can do this, and it basically changed the vocabulary of my writing after that. And so then, yeah, I end up going down this science fiction track because of a lot ways because of this book.
Okay, great.
Yeah. My career trajectory was very largely shaped by comic books. That I think when I was in college, like most of my recreational reading was comics. I was sort of growing up in the age of like, I guess, golden age of Vertigo comics and Helix comics, which was, I think, new encapsulation of, I guess, sort of non-superhero, but let's say like, you know, sophisticated adult science fiction and fantasy comics. And so I did my first editorial internship at DC Comics, and that was when I kind of like started to know that I wanted to be an editor. I wound up going largely into prose, but at the time, I think because I was reading a lot of that, like Transmetropolitan, Sandman, The Invisibles, like that was where I was taking in a lot of my genre reading, and like definitely pushed me into wanting to help create those stories and put them on the market.
Awesome. I think I'll jump back to a former answer for me, which once again, Jurassic Park. I just ended up really liking, you know, some of the themes and concepts that were discussed in that. And so that kind of influenced how I ended up writing the Of Cinder and Bone series. What is a particular representation that you guys would like to see in science fiction? And is that something you've been able to write as a matter, like, and an example for me, for example, is Dr. Kamala Anjali is one of the main leads in my Of Cinder and Bone series. And it's particularly because I noticed in American cinema and even in some writing that there's not a lot of representation for Indian or Middle Eastern characters. And I was like, why? This is absolutely fascinating. So I kind of jumped on that horse. So what are some representations that you guys are really interested in, and have you been able to see them recently, or have you been able to write them?
I'm interested in representations of Black people that are full and dynamic and diverse, because I think a lot of time on TV we have so many stereotypes. You're either a round-the-way girl, or you're this, or you're this. I write characters to let you know that people are whole people. They're diverse. They have different thought patterns. They have layers, and it can all be in one family. We're not a monolithic people. And I think that's just to break those stereotypes and just to see the real humanity of a person. And that's very important to me.
Great.
I guess I've got two answers there. The first is that I really want to see more international and translated work. I've done a little bit of editing of translated works, and it's an enormously enriching experience. We truly see some narrative styles that are very different than what we're exposed to in from mainstream American writing, and also just like getting works that are coming from other languages into so that we are kind of taking in more as a culture rather than like expecting that we're exporting to the world. And I think the other is intersectional identities, that not that we, you know, are very near, like at all done with kind of like just getting in basic representation, but seeing queer Black characters, seeing, you know, a neuroatypical non-binary character, like, because so many people that I know are not like, you know, they are marginalized from more than one perspective. And that is something that we don't think that we have very much of in or you know, enough of in narrative right now, that we'll see a person that is kind of like checking off this one box, but a lot of people check off 3 or 4 boxes, and I think that makes a, like, you know, really a beautiful amalgam of their identity. So I want to see that in our fiction as well.
Okay, Liz, actually, I have a great question that I thought of. Is a lot of this relates to language and to culture. What is, if someone was interested in, especially independent and self-published writers, if they were interested in trying to get their work translated, what's that process? Because I've noticed that a lot of large publishers have access in the process if they want to get their work translated, but I haven't really seen like a path for independent authors to do that.
Oof, wow. Yeah, this is really tricky. I mean, this could be a panel in and of itself, and I think
I kind of figured.
Yeah, the biggest thing is going to be that I think, especially with international, like getting the focus is always on the biggest thing. So that's the big detriment against an indie thing, that like even international publishers that are trying to do, let's say like literary work or have a specific focus, they're often looking for the bestsellers. So it's very hard to convince somebody, partially because it's kind of like a game of percentages where somebody says, oh, well, you know, we think that maybe the translated market is going to be 2% of what the US market is or something, and vice versa, that like, you know, we expect that those numbers don't always translate because the existing audience that really loves that project is not there at all in the destination country. So people are not, they're not as much reading because I love this thing, I want to get this translated and published in another country. They're looking for, this is a bestseller, and therefore we hope that the audience will be big enough. So I think that for indie authors, the answer is kind of true, both from going into English and out of English. And often that's like having to do a lot of the work yourself in the early stage, that you get a translator friend to do a translation on spec. A lot of people that are picking up projects in other countries they can probably read English, but you know, how do you get it noticed? Like it's often maybe to say, oh, this already exists. We're cutting down the financial barriers of needing to hire a translator by letting you read the thing in the language that you wanted to go into. So a lot of people wind up doing kind of a lot of like, you know, hard work and financial investment themselves to even just get recognized as a potential project in other countries. It's hard right now, and I think we have a long way to go. There's some, you know, I think especially like short fiction markets, for example, that are trying to bridge that gap in both directions, but are often doing it in an under-resourced fashion.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight. It hadn't even occurred to me that's exactly what could really, you know, help that angle of diversity and integrating other cultures, is definitely translating it across to different places where it's available, so we can see the differences in how all of us write and understand what they're about. Thank you so much for that insight. That makes me think of another question, as a matter of fact. Do you guys have, I do this a little bit in little short bits. So I have a pretty diverse cast for my particular dragon hunting series. So I've got some Japanese characters, and again, Kamala is Indian and Middle Eastern. And I like to put little phrases that are in one of their native languages. Is that something that you guys like to do, is to include cultural things in your writing? And it doesn't have to be necessarily translations. Are there other like I said, colloquialisms or certain cultures that American readers wouldn't be as familiar with, that you like to introduce them to?
I do, because I like the character, for you to see the full picture of that character, what they're familiar with, go into their world and how they see things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess this kind of piggybacks off of your earlier question in terms of, you know, the characters I want to see in my work. Because like I was born in London. My mother was born in Jamaica, and my dad is straight up hood. So, you know, so just in that story of what does Blackness look like, for example, it's not a monolith for me. And so, so if I'm trying to, so in my current work, what I'm doing is sort of like expanding that. So what does my community look like in a interstellar backdrop, for example? But then to get all that culture right too, is like, what does this aspect look like? What does this aspect look like? And you find yourself building, you know, even in the world building stage, you know, this idea of just, even if I was just to stick with Blackness, that's a whole lot of cultures involved there. You know, I hang out with hip hop scientists, for example, you know, that's something I want to, you know, I want to portray. Is like, I literally hang out with hip hop scientists. You know, I want to have those sort of characters in play. And each one has each element has their own culture, their own way of being and moving through the world. So it's like I'm constantly having to put those different cultural pieces into place.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, if no one has anything else to add, I'd like you all to just go around one more time and just briefly give your name and something that you're working on or your work, so we can go ahead and have our outro. That's our time for today. So please go ahead.
My name is Violette Meyer. My latest book is Hags, Haints, and Hoodoo. It's a supernatural short story collection. You can find all of my work at violettemeier.com. That's VIOLETTEMEIER. Thank you.
My name is Maurice Broaddus. My next book out is called Unfadable. It's another middle grade detective novel that comes out in the spring of 2021. And then the first of my Afrofuturist sci-fi space opera comes out in 2022. The book one is called Sweep of Stars.
Yeah. I'm Liz Gorinsky. I'm repping Erewhon Books, and we're at EREWHONBOOKS.com. We just released The Scapegracers, which was an indie bestseller. It's a story of a teen lesbian witch outcast finding her coven. And right around the time that you're seeing this, we're going to be releasing C.L. Polk's The Midnight Bargain, which is like a fantasy alternate history romance that is really gorgeous. Just got its 3rd-star review, so we're super excited about that.
All right, and I am Kyoko M. I write the Black Parade Urban Fantasy series. I'm currently working on the Of Cinder and Bone Dragon Hunting series. I've got a new book coming out, as a matter of fact, in just a month on October 24th called Of Fury and Fangs. We appreciate everybody participating today. Panelists, you've been great. If you enjoyed this panel, please be sure to check out Multiverse's other programming this weekend. Our full schedule is available on multiversecon.org. Thank you so much, everybody, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.